Oh dear, he was uncomfortably close to her, and she could feel her palms getting really sweaty. But Evelyn was still not finished yet. She pulled at Pete's shirt, distracting him for a moment. Mr. Pete, would you mind showing me some moves on the dance floor? I'm completely outdated, and when it comes to modern moves and grooves, and you have the perfect shorts for dancing. She complimented him sarcastically. He took nearly everything as a compliment anyway. Evelyn glided to the dance floor as smooth as an octopus scaling the depths of the great deep ocean. At the same time, I have a few tips which might help you improve your chances of winning at the next bake-off. She urged Pete onto the dance floor, and unfortunately there was no holding him back. And I wouldn't alarm you by describing how he looked boogieing on down on the dance floor in those ridiculous shorts. Better left to the imagination. Or maybe not. Pete didn't want Sharon to get the wrong idea about him and Miss Evelyn Fox, who was still married and very hot for her age. So he kept on calling loudly to Sharon from the dance floor, "Catch you later, Blondie. I won't be long." To make Sharon squirm in her seat even more, he kept winking at her. She began tutting loudly whenever he did this, and Chad noticed her humiliation, although he found it totally funny and couldn't help remarking about it. "I guess that guy annoys you a bit, fair dinkum." He was grinning kindly at her with sparkling eyes and an open, glistening smile, which set her heart racing every time without fail. She tried to not look directly at him. She felt afraid that he would somehow read by her eyes or her face that she was completely head over heels into him. She kept blushing without giving her cheeks permission to turn such a bright red shade, and covered it up by fanning herself with her creamy silk serviette. "Yes, you guessed right," she spoke carefully, scared that her voice would falter by his nearness to her. She avoided looking directly in his eyes, just in case her eyes gave the secret away. Surely, if he knew, she felt certain that he would reject her. He didn't want her in the way that she wanted him. She felt almost sure that it would be the case, but she wasn't 100%, and he wasn't, but she wasn't 100% sure that he didn't want her like that. She was merely trying to protect herself from getting hurt, because she could cope with anyone rejecting her, even her parents, but not Chad. He lifted up his strong jawline and pursed his lips momentarily before talking to her. She held her breath in anticipation, wondering what he would say. "I noticed you at the bake-off. Well, I have noticed you before that around the college. I always wanted to make friends with you, but you are really popular and always have those girls following you around wherever you go. It kind of put me off," he added with a flick of his crisp golden hair. "Oh no," she thought to herself, "he only wants to be friends." But he wasn't finished yet. He took a swig of his fruit drink, and the fluted glass looked tiny and fragile in his strong hands. "I mean, it is easy to like someone like you." He winked at her. Was that meant to be a compliment, or was he just fooling around, or maybe just another attempt at being friends? After all, he was a friendly, sociable type of guy. The more he spoke, the more he confused her. What point was he trying to get across, she wondered, still baffled. He noticed the creased frown on her forehead that had overstayed its welcome on her face. "I was thinking to myself at the bake-off, had you meant to wear that outfit on purpose, or were you late for a fashion shoot?" He chuckled loudly. His white glossy teeth clicked slightly against his lip as he spoke. She really loved it. All his little mannerisms made her heart yearn all the more for him. But her heart had already sunk to the floor with an invisible plonk. Did he know that she hung on every word he uttered? She tried really hard to withstand her eyes from gushing with tears. She couldn't help but say, "Yeah, I know my fashion sense isn't to everyone's liking. You're right, I look ridiculous and tarty." She spoke slowly, yet his sensitive heart immediately detected sadness in her answer. He knew that he had offended her. No, please, Sharon, I am really sorry if my words offended you. I didn't mean it in that way. I meant to imply that you looked amazing, just right for a fashion shoot. Please don't be sad. He grinned gently at her with his twinkling eyes. He could see how sad he had made her, and that troubled him somehow. He was a kind guy, and something about this girl sparked interest in him. She was right about him. He was kind and caring, as well as irresistibly handsome. His answer had made her smile, and she tried hard to wipe the smug smile off her face. He grinned happy that she wasn't sad with him anymore. He grinned happily that she wasn't sad with him anymore. He reached his hand across the table in front of her. The iced strawberry drink looked yummy, but as he reached past Sharon, their hands touched, and he felt intense chemistry between them. The chemistry took him off guard and made him loosen his grip on the jug, and in Hindi-style movie slow motion, the jug literally crashed down hard on the table. The glass splintered and splattered all over the place, especially on his hand. To Sharon's shocked horror, she noticed that Chad was bleeding. He had suffered a very deep cut in his hand, where a piece of broken jug had lodged itself into it. Without a second thought, Sharon leapt forward and pulled the chiseled glass out of his bleeding hand. Her eyes frantically darted around the room, looking for something, anything to bind his hand in. First she saw a thick serviette, perfect for the job, she thought. Although she was no doctor, she knew the basics in first aid. But as she grabbed the serviette, a waiter next to her rudely advised, "If you take that, the manager will be really unhappy about it." The annoying man was calmly pruning a decorative tree by the table in a very useless, couldn't care less type of attitude in such an emergency as this. Was he kidding her right now? But Sharon had had enough and grabbed the scissors straight out of his hand. To the surprise of the people gathered at her table and other spectators witness to the incident, she began to snip and snap frantically at her more than expensive evening gown, which her dad had ordered tailor-made all the way from Paris. It was her favourite dress. But what did she care while Chad was suffering? It meant nothing to her in comparison to his pain. Sharon cut out a big chunk of material from it and started to wrap it tightly around Chad's bleeding hand. She bound it as carefully and fast as she could, and then dived into a few remaining drink glasses to fish out as much ice as she could muster, pressing it firmly onto the wound. Chad was so stunned by the accident and all the commotion going on that he automatically let Sharon take charge, but the bleeding still didn't stop. Much to Sharon's horror, it was dripping in big red drops all over the beige carpeted floor. So she pulled Chad out of his chair with the added help of a few of his friends who had rushed to his side during the emergency. She was grateful for the extra help, as Chad was a really tall guy who was obviously still shaken and feeling quite dizzy from the increasingly heavy blood loss. They dashed with him into the hotel lobby. All the members of staff on duty were shocked at the sight of this tall guy being heaved into the lobby, his hand dripping with blood all over the clean, polished tiles. Sharon was the first to speak to the startled staff. "I need a driver as soon as possible. We need to take him to the nearest hospital." She hollered at the only calm-looking member of staff, who was a slender yet short Arab guy with a kind smile. He bowed his head politely and marched off somewhere, hopefully to get the required help, Sharon thought to herself. Momentarily, a woman in a smart black suit rushed over, her stilettos pitter-pattering heavily like monsoon rain on the lobby floor. "Madam, I apologize for this unforeseen incident. You can go with our hotel company limousine, complimentary of course in view of what has just happened. The nearest hotel is the Starry Sheath. It is 7 stars. Is that convenient enough?" She had an anxious look on her face. Sharon thought she was worried that the hotel would be held responsible for the incident. "Thank you, that sounds excellent. By the way, it was an unfortunate accident. It was no one's fault. You have been a great help." Sharon winked at her anxious face and hoped she got the message that the hotel wasn't to blame. Sharon was really sweet and thoughtful at times. She even surprised herself. Intent on getting Chad to the nearest hospital ASAP, she led the way to the awaiting limousine. It was normal for her to enter into such luxury, but for Chad's few friends it was the ride of a lifetime. She didn't want them distracted too much and made them focus more attention on their struggling patient than the spacey, luxurious car they were riding in, which was a really hard task, men and their cars. The driver of the limousine was going as fast as he could, more frustrated at the damage the blood stains would inevitably do to his newly washed and waxed pristine car than getting this bleeding patient to the hospital. After what seemed like forever for Sharon, they eventually rolled up in front of the hospital's grand entrance, and Sharon sprang open the limousine door and beckoned the waiting nurses and two doctors to take Chad into the hospital. He was whisked away in a wheelchair. Sharon reassured Chad's friends that he was now in safe hands and that she would hang around until he was ready to go home. They were happy to get another ride back to the hotel in the luxury limousine, and as it faded into the distance, Sharon was left in the fresh, crisp air, looking at the night sky. She was used to this feeling of loneliness, a feeling that she didn't quite fit in. But then, remembering Chad, her heart brightened up again, and she realised that with him there was a greater sense of belonging than she had ever had in her life. A new and improved Sharon. The very next day, the entire college were busy gossiping about the ball and, of course, the Chad incidents. The lively corridors were more alive with the latest news, and they all seemed to be anticipating Sharon and Chad's arrival. The thing was, Sharon always arrived early to college on Monday mornings, but surprisingly, today she was late. Her faithful followers were fleeting around and around like traumatized circus animals, wondering what on earth had happened to their leader. Sharon was usually the first to make her entrance on the beginning of each Monday. She would strut herself confidently, imagining herself to be working a red carpet rather than a college corridor. The Sharon clan were at the ready as usual, but she was still nowhere to be seen. Everyone was waiting to congratulate the heroine who had selflessly torn her favourite party dress to help save the life of her fellow student, although the truth of what really happened on that night was slightly or even more so exaggerated by the youngsters. Even so, Sharon had been labelled the heroine of the night, and even the Cupcake Clubbers were keen to pat her on the back for her courageous effort in helping the helpless Chad. But boy, were they in for a shock. Sharon was on her way to college, but feeling unusually shy about making her entrance. She hung around her bright red Porsche Cabriolet 911 for as long as she could, but realizing that it was now time to face the music and show the college that there was more to her than met the eye, she banged the double doors of the college entrance open. With a newfound confidence, whether they accepted the new her or not, at least she was trying to be something she wasn't. At least she wasn't trying to be something she wasn't anymore. Jaws certainly dropped in the eerie, echoing college that morning. Sharon's usual clip-clop heels had been replaced by a squelch sound. Where, oh where, had her patent red Monday morning stilettos gone? Her loyal followers were waiting right on cue at their usual place by the double doors, and as they saw the new and maybe improved Sharon, they stopped short in their tracks. Oh dear, what had she done to herself? Instead of following her lead, they held back and continued to be stunned by her appearance, as were the rest of the college, who quickly dispersed as they heard the annoying chuckles of Pete the Flexer resonating louder and louder up the corridor. Even Pete stopped short in his tracks as he came face to face with Sharon. What had happened to her usual fine print leopard miniskirt and metallic gold shiny tank top, which she always paired together every Monday morning? Instead, Sharon's fashion blunder comprised a full-length floral maxi skirt and a simple pastel t-shirt. The students were all in shock horror, and even Pete couldn't keep his mouth closed upon Sharon's appearance. In fact, Pete felt sure that he had swallowed a fly, his mouth being the widest open. After recollecting himself, he strolled up to the unassuming Sharon, and without much trepidation he asked, "Are you drunk, Sharon, babe?" He cackled like a ridiculous monkey, feeling pleased with himself that he was the only one who dared to voice what everyone else was thinking. She looked at him apprehensively, wondering what would emerge next out of his large mouth. He appeared to be squinting. Was there something wrong with his vision, or was her usual burst of scarlet lipstick missing? Instead, her pouty lips seemed to have been drawn in a subtle pinky beige shade. Her usual bright red blusher had been swapped for a pastel pink dash of powder. "Of course I'm not drunk. I already told you that I'm a teetotal. After all I went through with my dad's heavy reliance on wine, do you think I would risk heading down the same road as him? You've got to be kidding." He made me realise that obsessive drinking could quite easily conjure up angry elements in anyone's personality. Pete knew it was right. Sharon wouldn't go near any alcoholic beverages. She was always seen sipping fresh fruit juices or mineral water from her eco bottles. Pete continued with his interrogation, proud of himself that he was the only one in the college brave enough to ask Sharon what was on everyone else's mind. "So I am thinking, correct me if I'm wrong, that maybe you have made a drastic fashion fumble today. Perhaps the trauma of the ball has unsettled your usual clear mind. I will give you that. But babe, it's not too late to go back home and slip into something more appropriate. I mean, please, you have your reputation to uphold. I am more than close to you, but this is surely too much for even me to handle. I mean, look around. Everyone is looking at you." He hid his embarrassed face in his hands and shook his head disapprovingly. What was up with that? Pete was such a head case. But he wasn't finished yet. He looked up at her slowly, grasping her alarmed face in his cupped hands. This was more than embarrassing. The whole college judging her fashion taste, or in their perspective, a lack of it. "I mean, babe, I can't have the pleasure of seeing your gorgeous legs in that ruffled old skirt." He scanned her skirt as hard as he could, but the thickness and floaty texture was too strong for even his sharp eyes to see through. "Your hourglass figure is all covered up with that. You know what us guys are like. Oogling at hot chicks really makes our day." He grinned cheekily, assuming that what he was admitting to was totally normal and the done thing by all the men in the world on whose behalf he was speaking on, by the way. Sharon was unamused by this statement, and he reinforced the exact reason why she wasn't clad in next to nothing on this particular Monday. Pulling his grip away from her sore cheek, she felt it was now time for her reply. "That's the thing, Pete. I never really felt myself. It was as if I lived for the attention. I was so sad that it made my day just to get a few looks here and there. But my eyes opened yesterday, and I don't know why." She paused for a min. She knew exactly what had caused this revelation. Perhaps a tall, handsome blonde guy going by the name of Chad. She recollected herself trying to wipe the broad smile which had just spread itself across her face. "Anyway, I have realized that there is more to me than this. In fact, I feel more at peace, more in touch with nature than I ever have. It makes me happy somehow, which I never was before. I know that I'm probably talking on a level which is hard for a guy like you to understand, but I guess it is only fair to tell you the truth." She fobbed him off as kindly as she could, eyeing up his denim shorts and bright pink vest. Pete paused for what seemed like ages. She didn't realize that he could be quiet for more than a few seconds, but just as she had surprised him, He also equally surprised her with his silent contemplation. After what had seemed like forever, Pete backed away from Sharon cautiously, which she was rather relieved about. Now she was no-go area. It is strange how something as simple as a mere clothing change could create such a reaction in someone. Now Sharon understood what it would be like for any minority to feel ostracized. Yeah, I guess it makes sense, babe. I never thought of it in that way. Sugar, spice, all things groovy nice. Did he just say that? She smirked at herself and cleared her throat, trying her best to take him seriously, which was a hard task judging by his outrageous clothes. He paused again, deeply affected by something, and with a sad shake of his face, he bent down by her, for he was quite a tall guy, and she definitely wasn't a tall girl. But you know, it's never going to work out between us. I can't be seen walking together with you after you've already floated around in that. He pointed at her maxi skirt with a half-hearted smile, and she was trying more than ever not to burst out in laughter. Sharon gulped her laughter down as hard as she could, and as he straightened up to his full height, she managed to say, "I'll try to live with my broken heart." Grinning at her own sarcasm, she was glad to get the words out without laughing, and Pete literally banged his fist on her shoulder. "Don't worry, babes, one day you just might get over me, although that's not an easy task for any woman." He shook his head again and she laughed out loud. "Laugh through the pain if it makes you feel better." Then he waddled off down the corridor. Boy, for such a tough guy, he was such a card. Sharon felt such a relief to see the back of Pete. His constant fake adoration of her the past few months had really taken its toll on her, and she was finally free of his shackles. But the day was still young, and it wasn't going to be an easy task to face the day at college alone. After all, who would want to befriend her now that she had changed from her popular self to a hippie chick? It wasn't exactly the done thing. Being unique was a large price to pay, she thought to herself, as backs turned away from Sharon, and she walked slowly down the corridor to her locker. It sprang open, and 100 red rose petals fell out of it, undoubtedly from Pete, which at least cheered her up. But where was she going to store all of her thick books? She pushed the petals into a massive heap at the side of her locker, but a few fell onto the floor, and as she bent down to pick them, she banged heads with someone. A mutual ouch caused her to look straight ahead, and her fuzzy eyes focused on a welcome treat. Yes, oh yes, it was Mr. Ozzy himself, squatting right opposite her in the flesh. His hurt hand had been bandaged and it hung limply by his side. "Sharon, I'm really sorry. I wanted to help you tidy these. How embarrassing. They were meant to be a private gift." Chad peeked over his shoulder at the few spectators gathering near to the two unlikely pair and blushed slightly. He was used to attention, so why was he behaving so strangely? Sharon was tongue-tied. He had this way of making her go weak at the knees, and she melted like warm margarine over sumptuous pancakes. Recollecting herself, her thoughts argued against her feelings, convincing herself that she was merely being hormonal, nothing more. But why, oh why, did he make her beam so much? Why did she keep racking her brains to say anything just to keep him near her as long as possible? She didn't know, but the overpowering feeling of adoration was overtaking her, and she knew it was more than just hormones. His eyes twinkled back at her, and he smiled his usual delicious smile. Bring it on, Mr. Charmy." She heard her thoughts loudly, and was almost afraid that he would, so she began to speak. "How is your hand doing, Chad?" She tried to act as cool and candid as possible, but it was such an effort. His stare was making her seriously blush. She tried to act as cool as a cucumber again and again, but it was a concerted effort on both sides, although she didn't realize that he felt it too. "Much better, thanks, Sharon." She loved the way he said her name. but shook her head as if trying to get the thought out of her mind. He didn't seem to notice it and continued on. Now he was leaning against her locker, playing with his hair. She found herself analysing his body language and knew from an article on that topic in one of those silly teenage advice magazines, which proved that when a guy is romantically interested in a girl, then he will play with his hair or groom it. Taking this as an encouraging sign, she dared to hope that he actually cared about her also. But how could he? He was far above her in absolutely everything. He was way more good looking than her, and that was for sure. Only the marvellous thing about him was that he didn't realise it. He was as humble a guy as they got. He was tall and handsome with the brightest smile. Her sad days were always brightened by this, and even on this very day, when she was feeling low and unconfident, somehow he appeared with his usual charming grin and shook his wispy fringe away from his strong forehead. She noticed everything about him without him even realizing. Nice clothes, not your usual style, but cool and breezy. I'm digging it. He ran his hand through his hair and she smiled sweetly at her dream man, though he didn't know it, though he didn't know that she was thinking that. If only she knew what his thoughts were, it would have meant everything to her. Thanks, Chad. She stammered, almost calling him charming. Oh dear. She was letting out more than she wanted. He still didn't seem to notice her trepidation. I really wanted to thank you for the amazing help at the ball. I mean, you were such a quick thinker. And then I found out that you had actually torn a chunk out of your most favourite dress to bind my cut. I really can't express how much that meant to me. He blushed again, or did she just imagine it? Maybe he was feeling as hot as she thought he looked. Sharon smiled and blushed and then smiled and blushed again. It was nothing, Chad. It was the least that I could do for you. My dress means nothing as long as you were okay. That was all I was thinking about, saving you. She spoke honestly and hoped that it didn't sound too corny. He beamed at the floor. They were both quiet for some time, and she didn't know just what to say. You're really welcome, Chad. I would do anything for. Sharon stopped herself again. What was it with this guy? The truth seemed to ooze out of her without her consent. Chad smiled bashfully and seemed uneasy. A few college students passed by him, obviously intrigued, but to Sharon's delight he didn't bat an eyelid in their direction. He was all eyes on Sharon. The thing is, I've been looking for you all morning because there is something really important that I need to talk to you about. Chad said seriously. Sharon was afraid what was coming next. Maybe he knew how she felt about him and he wanted to let her down gently. She was overreacting, surely. But how did she know it wasn't really that? She just couldn't stand to hear the truth from him, and before realizing it, she fled the scene and legged it outside. What was she doing now? It was tipping it down with rain, and she felt ridiculous standing there. Her floaty skirt was now clinging irritatingly to her legs like a slimy serpent. Outside in the cool breeze, her skin soaked through, she shuddered, feeling so alone. Feeling so alone was the norm for her, but it still hurt and ached like crazy. She hated herself for having run away from the man she had finally found, and boy had she searched long and far for him. She had to get through a few rotten eggs to find him, but find him she finally did. Or maybe he was the one who had found her. Now that he had stood face to face with her, it was the perfect time to tell him how she truly felt. But she wasn't quite at liberty to do so, and the fear of rejection overtook her. The worst thing in the world was not knowing how he felt in return. Not knowing whether her love for him was unrequited or not was tearing at her soul, but at the same time there remained a safe haven in knowing that he didn't realize how much she loved him. But feeling such a love that she could never express, just trying to nail it down with 1,000 hammers was an exerted effort to say the least. She wanted him more than she had ever needed anything in her life. It was the purest love she would ever find, and he was the most precious person that she had ever known. Her tears streamed down her face, feeling lost and all alone. She looked up into the sky, and her heart leapt out to the only one who knew the deepest secrets of her heart. Running away from Chad was the hardest thing for her. She was battling within herself, but the further she went away from him, the more she craved him, his company. Chatting to him was the best and most fulfilling feeling in the world. He charmed her with his personality in a way that she couldn't quite describe, but she wasn't free to be his. She was terrified of the outcome. Sharon, Sharon. She could hear a faint call in the background. Although the rain was pretty tremendous, and the echoes of crashing thunder jumped her, she could still make out a voice behind her. Turning around in the pouring rain, she came face to face with Chad. Oh dear! How on earth would she explain to him why she had run away so recklessly? But he didn't even give her the chance to contrive a reason for her escape. Sharon, I'm sorry if I said anything to upset you. It is pelting it down out here. Chad held his heavy load of study books valiantly above her soaked head, and a few drips trickled down her neck. She hardly felt them, though, and numbed by his love, she dared to ask him what she had never dared to say so before this moment. She didn't really know what had urged her to be so forward. Maybe it was a spur of the moment situation where everything felt just right. The rain was pouring down in welcome drizzles, and her hero, her dream man, was standing right next to her, face to face. Well, not quite face to face, as he was much taller than her, although his face was naturally bent down in her direction. The scene was set for what she was about to say, if she only dared, and taking a deep breath, it all came out. She couldn't help it. After all, would you blame her? He was holding the heavy books above her head in such a tender, protective, shielding way that she felt sure he cared about her. I would do anything for the man I love. She heard her own words echo out loud. Did she really just say the words that had been pressing at her throat for so many months? Her face blushed a brilliant bright red, and realizing that Chad had heard her very clearly, she looked demurely at the ground. The pavement beneath her feet had shards of grass sprouting out of the small crevices, and she longed to hide under them. She longed to hide away anywhere at that particular moment, but there was nowhere to run and hide. Chad was still motionless, paralyzed to the spot. Well, this was certainly embarrassing. Oh gosh, she felt the biggest plonker in the world. No one was around. No sound was audible except the slow, increased intensity of the rain pounding into the grassy pavement. Chad finally looked away from her, and she noticed him focus on a brown-haired girl who was trying her best to dodge the large puddles which popped up here and there on her footpath. The attractive brunette noticed the pair standing together under the rain, Chad's arm still raised above Sharon, shielding her from getting wet, and she smiled at him without realizing. How sweet and unpredictable a couple, she thought to herself. The thing is, I'm supposed to go back to Australia at the end of this year, but have decided to extend my visa for another 3 years and continue studying here. I feel that it is too hard for me to leave a certain person, someone special. As Chad spoke these words, he gazed for a few moments in the brunette girl's direction. She was almost wrestling with an unruly umbrella, which was turning inside out and upside down due to the abrupt gusts of wind blowing at her ever so often. Sharon noticed Chad looking in Sally Ann's direction and feared that the someone special her Prince Charming was talking about was clearly not her and Sally Ann instead. After all, when Chad was on his own, she knew nothing of where he went and what he did. She assumed that he was practicing his surfing skills most of the time. Slightly naive of her, but maybe it made sense. Sharon's heart sank into her feet like a heavy sack of bricks weighing her down. She felt suddenly shaky and held on to Chad's tall frame to stabilize herself. He was surprised at the sudden reaching out towards him, and he stumbled, dropping his books, many of them just missing, the small puddle collecting beneath their feet. Sally Ann stood still, watching the two lovebirds with sincere admiration. New love and true love was the sweetest thing, neither of them knowing what the other one was thinking or knowing what to do in that poignant moment in both of their lives. Chad looked again at Sally Ann, and Sharon was then convinced that her tall stallion of a man had feelings for her instead of Sharon. She backed away from clasping onto him, very slowly saying, "Oh, I see. Sally Ann is very beautiful and sweet. She must be your special someone." She raced away as fast as she could, but the rain was making her hasty dash a very slippery one. "Sharon! Sharon!" She could hear him calling her, but she didn't dare to turn around and face him. How could she now? After all, she had confessed to him that she actually loved him, and he had dared to hope for once in her life that she had finally found her Mr. Right. Even if he didn't want her, the love she felt just wouldn't go away like that, because when you love out of a deep respect for the person's personality, when you have never met anyone who could compare to that one guy, it was a feeling that just wouldn't go away by itself. Her eyes streamed with water, or was it just the raindrops on her face? Maybe it was both. Oh dear, it was too much for poor Sharon to take. The faster she walked, the more she felt someone gaining on her, until a strong hand pulled her shoulder back. Alarmed and afraid all at once, she turned around, and oh no, yes, to be sure, it was Chad. Puffing and panting, he stopped her from escaping this time. "Sharon, Sally Ann is fair dinkum, but she is not my special someone. She is a sweet and friendly girl, but not my type. You are my special someone, Sharon. I couldn't wish for anyone else. Can't you see it in my eyes? Can't you tell the way I get nervous whenever you are around? It has always been you since I first came to this college. Only I thought you were coupled with that Pete guy, the one in short shorts." Chad and Sharon giggled at the same time, which relieved the tension a tad. "You see, we have the same sense of humour. We could talk for hours on end without boredom. We just click somehow. This type of feeling only comes once with one person. You are very sassy and lively, and now that you have gone bohemian, loving that by the way." He smirked, eyeing up her sodden clothes approvingly. But what was that about, she wondered. "It makes me love you even all the more." He blurted out unimaginable words into her ears. Did he just say he loved her, or was she imagining it? No, to be sure. He did love her. It wasn't a dream. After all the yearning for him and sleepless nights wondering how he felt, or if he even felt anything at all, she finally had her answer, and it was the answer she had wanted to hear for such a long time. All Sharon could do was beam from cheek to cheek. He reciprocated her feelings, and that was all she ever needed from him. Just by being herself, and always true to herself, she had won the heart of the man that she had always wanted and knew she deserved deep down. "But I don't deserve you, Chad. You are way too good for me, far above me. I truly believe that you could get any woman you wanted. I don't want you to regret choosing me. You are gorgeous, and who wouldn't want you? What would people think? I never imagined that someone like you would fall for someone like me. Are you sure that I am what you really want?" Sharon's head dropped. Her reservations were taking over and making her insecure. She had already got what she wanted, wished for, and dreamed of. He was standing right in front of her, designed especially for her. She remembered the first time she saw him. He was sat on the college sofa right opposite her. There were many people gliding in and out of the main entrance, but she zoomed in on him. His face appeared to be glowing and almost angelic. He never stopped smiling. She wondered if he was really an angel. His handsomeness took her breath away each and every time they met. She remembered whatever he chose to wear each day, and she respected him more than any of the guys she had ever met. He was tall and gallant, humble and charming. His accent was adorable and melted her heart. He spoke softly yet with strong emphasis. He was just right, so why was she now putting obstacles in their way? Sharon, what are you saying? If I wanted to choose them, then I would have done. But with you, it is so different, unique and special. The short time that we spent at the hospital together, just you and me chatting for a few hours, was the best time of my life. And I know you feel it too. It is almost like a magnetic pull pulling me towards you. And I had to keep restraining myself back from your love. The chemistry I felt between us was electrifying. And that is why my hand slipped on the night of the ball, because your nearness to me made me feel so nervous. I know you've tried to hide your true feelings for me, but somehow my heart understands yours. He led her into the college entrance and sat her down on the same sofa where he had noticed her and she had noticed him. Chad began shaking his load of books and they started to dry out as he laid them over the nearby radiator. Sharon felt totally at peace, although her cheeks were still burning red. He had that effect on her somehow. She checked all the signs: beating heart, check; blushing cheeks, check; sweaty palms, check; happy face, check; adoring smile, check. Yes, for sure, she was in love. Chad sat opposite her. Please let me sit next to you. He asked her permission so sweetly that it swept her off her feet in an instant. She nodded, and his shiny eyes focused self consciously on the shaggy rug cozying their wet feet. He always wore flip flops, even in the dead of winter. She remembered watching him the year before crunching through the snow in his favourite Australian flip flops, but she never thought it was weird. She loved that about him. Sharon pinched herself hard on the shoulder. What did you do that for? Chad shook his glossy wet hair out of his eyes. Just checking that I'm not dreaming. She laughed and he loved it, the way she was ridiculous and sassy at the same time. She was calming down now after all the drama, and as her more than ample but sat into the frumpy college sofa, she didn't care who was watching them or what they thought. Yes, they weren't the norm. They may not always fit into the ideal of what was expected in their college, but they loved each other. They were dedicated to one another, and above all, they were right for each other. And that was all that mattered to them. Well, I guess that things are really changing for the better. I'm a new woman, and who'd have thought of me walking down this same college corridor in a long gypsy style skirt, and to top it off with you? Finally, I feel that everything will be okay, and you know what? I'm not even living for the future or worrying about it. I am living for the present, for what we are sharing right now, and nothing in the world means more to me. Sharon hummed a cheerful tune that day, some sort of K-pop song which she couldn't remember where she had heard it from. But little did the two blissful and popular college students know that they were being watched with eager eyes. The Sharon clan had seen most of what had happened between Chad and Sharon, and sadly they were feeling utterly lost for the first time in their nonsensical lives. I mean, who could blame them? They had been following Sharon around cluelessly for as long as they could remember, and the flock of sheep that they had become were imitators of everything and anything Sharon did. They had followed her fashion styles, her hairstyles, even her eating styles, but now they didn't have a clue what to wear and how to dress or what to talk about. Their idol was now doing her own thing, following her own style, and to make it worse, she didn't seem to need them anymore. The girls felt replaced by Chad. They felt that they had lost something special. But what had they really gained from Sharon anyway? So the five girls were now gathered in the corner of the college library, and clinging on to each other for dear life, they began sobbing. The studious library goers shushed them as much as they could, until the librarians were forced to usher the herd of girls out. The whole scene was overemphasized by the girls, of course. That was what they were good at, or you could well say it was what they were bad at. Onlookers giggled and mocked them, but one person certainly wasn't. Sally Ann, who was just rushing out of the library, actually felt really sorry for them. What would they do now? Sally Ann had captured most of what had happened with a mental camera and couldn't wait to share it with the Cupcake Clubbers, but she would have to wait. She could hear the tooting of her mum's bright yellow Porsche and the thought of that lady stepping out of the flashy sports car and totally shaming her up in the college grounds was more than she could handle. So she swooped down the corridor like an eagle in flight and jumped into the funky waiting automobile outside the main entrance. Her mum screeched around the corner of the road which led up out of the college main entrance, much to the surprise and delight of the guys gathered around it.